His dying father left a land deed and a Bible, but the SEAL's dog uncovered the secret men killed to hide. A homeless Navy SEAL found a land deed in his father's Bible. His dog found what they hid inside. Snow buried the Bitterroot Mountains the night Cole Barrett opened his dead father's Bible inside a rusted pickup truck. Hidden between the pages was a deed to forgotten land and one chilling message: trust the dog. But when his retired military K-9 started digging beneath an abandoned farmhouse, Cole uncovered a buried secret tied to murder, corruption, and a war that never truly ended. Comment 1 or 0 and tell us where you're watching from. The snow started before sunset. Not the soft kind that drifted lazily through Christmas movies. This snow came down hard and sideways, driven by a bitter Montana wind that rattled the windows of the old pickup truck like skeletal fingers. Cole Barrett sat behind the wheel with the engine off, watching the storm swallow the truck stop, one frozen inch at a time. The neon sign above the diner flickered weakly through the blowing snow. Truckers welcome. One of the letters buzzed and died. Cole pulled his frayed army blanket tighter around his shoulders and exhaled slowly into his hands. The cab smelled faintly of old coffee, motor oil, wet dog fur, and cold leather. It wasn't much of a home, but after 8 months of drifting between truck stops, campgrounds, and abandoned parking lots, the rusted Ford F-150 had become the closest thing he had left to one. Beside him, Shadow lifted his head. The German shepherd's ears twitched toward the storm outside. "You hear something, buddy?" Cole asked quietly. Shadow stared through the frosted windshield, alert but calm. Cole reached over and scratched behind the dog's scarred ear. The shepherd leaned into the touch for half a second before settling back down across the seat. The dog was getting old. Not weak, never weak, but older. The black fur around his muzzle had gone silver over the past 2 winters, and one of his back legs stiffened in the cold from an old shrapnel injury neither of them had fully recovered from. Cole understood that feeling. At 44 years old, his body carried more pain than most men twice his age. Titanium screws in his shoulder, nerve damage in his left knee, migraines that came without warning, and the nightmares. The nightmares never stopped. Sometimes they smelled like smoke, sometimes like blood, sometimes like desert sand baking beneath helicopter rotors. Tonight, they smelled like snow. Cole closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the wind howl across the empty lot. A semi-truck rumbled somewhere nearby. Then, a sharp metallic clang echoed outside. Cole's eyes snapped open instantly. Years of training had burned that reflex into his nervous system. His body reacted before thought ever caught up. Shadow was already awake. The dog stood silently on the seat, muscles taut, staring toward the darkness between the fuel pumps. Cole scanned the lot carefully. Nothing. Just snow whipping beneath flickering lights. He exhaled slowly. "Easy," he murmured. Shadow kept staring. Cole trusted the dog more than he trusted himself. More than doctors. More than the VA. More than the pills they kept trying to force into his hands every few months. Shadow had pulled him out of panic attacks more times than he could count. The dog knew when the nightmares were coming before Cole did. Sometimes, he would wake him seconds before the screaming started. Sometimes he simply pressed his head against Cole's chest until the shaking stopped. That dog had saved his life long after the war ended. Cole looked down at the unopened manila envelope sitting on the dashboard. Barrett and Klein Estate Services. The return address was from Helena. He stared at it for another long moment, then finally picked it up. The envelope had arrived that afternoon at a shelter in Missoula, where Cole occasionally received mail when he was desperate enough to admit he needed one fixed location. He almost hadn't opened it. Almost threw it away, because the name typed across the front still hit like a punch to the ribs. Nathan Barrett, his father, dead 3 weeks now. Strange how news like that barely moved him anymore. Cole and his father hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years. Not since before Afghanistan. Not since before the divorce. Before the drinking. Before Cole learned exactly how easy it was for a man to lose every important thing in his life, one piece at a time. He broke the seal carefully. Inside were only 3 things. A folded letter, a property deed, and an old black Bible worn smooth around the edges. Cole frowned. "That's it?" Shadow watched him quietly. Cole unfolded the letter first. "Mr. Barrett, as executor of Nathan Barrett's estate, I am required to transfer the enclosed property deed and personal effects into your possession, effective immediately. Your father left no financial assets of significance. The property listed has remained inactive for 19 years. The keys were never recovered. My condolences. Arthur Klein, attorney at law. Cole snorted softly. Sounds about right. No money, no apology, no explanation, just another mess left behind. He tossed the letter onto the passenger seat and picked up the deed instead. 57 acres, Bitterroot Valley, Montana. The legal wording meant nothing to him. But one thing stood out immediately. The land sat deep in old logging country west of Darby, nearly 40 miles from the nearest real town, remote, isolated, the kind of place a man disappeared to, the kind of place Nathan Barrett would have chosen. Cole leaned back against the seat. He remembered almost nothing about his father clearly anymore, only fragments, calloused hands, the smell of cedar sawdust, long silences at dinner. A man who always seemed to be looking over his shoulder even when nobody was there. Nathan Barrett had never been cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruel men were easier to understand. Nathan had simply been absent, even when he stood in the same room, especially after Cole's mother died. Something in the old man had gone dark after that, and eventually, Cole left. Then came Bud's training, then the teams, then war, and somewhere along the line, the distance between father and son became permanent, until now. Cole looked at the Bible. The leather cover was faded and cracked from age. He almost laughed. Nathan Barrett never went to church a day in his life. Cole opened it carefully. Most of the pages were untouched. Then something slipped free from between the pages near the center and landed in his lap. A folded piece of yellow paper. Cole unfolded it slowly. The handwriting hit him immediately, his father's. Sharp block letters. Military neat. Trust the dog. He remembers what I couldn't tell you. Cole stared at the sentence. Once. Twice. Then a strange chill crawled slowly up his spine. Shadow suddenly lifted his head again. Low growl. Deep. Dangerous. Cole looked toward the windshield. The truck stop had gone strangely quiet. Even the diesel engines seemed farther away now. Shadow's growl deepened. Cole followed the dog's gaze toward the far edge of the parking lot. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow. Then, headlights. Two pale beams sitting motionless in the darkness beyond the fuel pumps. Watching. Cole narrowed his eyes. Black SUV. Engine running. Too far away to identify the driver. But the vehicle hadn't been there a few minutes earlier. Shadow barked once. Sharp. Warning. The SUV's headlights immediately switched off. Darkness swallowed it whole. Cole's pulse slowed into something colder. Combat calm. The same deadly stillness that used to settle over him before raids overseas. He reached beneath the seat automatically and wrapped his hand around the old combat nut taped there, not because he expected trouble, because habits kept men alive. Shadow stood fully now, staring into the storm, every muscle rigid. You know something, don't you? Cole whispered. The dog didn't move. Snow hammered against the windshield. The black SUV never turned its lights back on, but Cole knew it was still there. Watching. Waiting, and for the first time in years, the numb emptiness inside him shifted into something else. Curiosity, fear, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Purpose. Outside, the Montana storm swallowed the highway whole, while somewhere beyond the frozen darkness of the Bitterroot Mountains, an abandoned piece of land waited for them. And whatever Nathan Barrett had buried there, someone else was already searching for it. Cole barely slept that night. The black SUV eventually disappeared sometime after midnight, swallowed by the snowstorm without ever coming close enough for him to identify the driver. But the feeling it left behind lingered like smoke, trapped inside the cab of the truck. A feeling Cole knew too well. Being watched. Shadow never fully relaxed either. The German Shepherd stayed upright most of the night with his nose near the frosted glass, ears twitching at every sound outside. Only around dawn did the dog finally settle down enough to close his eyes. Cole envied him. Sleep came harder for men, especially men who remembered too much. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried under fresh white silence. The truck stop looked abandoned beneath the pale Montana sunrise. Snow covered the parked semis like giant frozen animals resting beside the highway. A single snowplow crawled across the lot, pushing heavy waves of ice toward the edges. Cole rubbed his aching shoulder and stepped out of the truck. The cold hit instantly, sharp enough to burn his lungs. Shadow jumped down beside him, paws crunching into the snow. You hungry? Cole asked. The dog glanced toward the diner. That was answer enough. Inside, the diner smelled like frying bacon, burnt coffee, and wet wool jackets thawing beside old heaters. Country music played softly from a dusty radio near the kitchen window. A few truckers sat hunched over coffee mugs. Nobody looked at Cole twice. That suited him fine. He slid into a booth near the back, while Shadow settled beside the table with quiet discipline. The old waitress behind the counter glanced at the dog and smiled faintly. Beautiful shepherd, she said while pouring coffee into Cole's chipped mug. Retired military, Cole replied. The waitress nodded with sudden understanding. Aren't they all? Cole looked up. The woman had to be pushing 70. Gray hair tucked beneath a faded blue bandana. Deep lines around her eyes. The kind of face shaped by hard winters and harder years. She placed the coffee pot down carefully. You headed somewhere in this weather? Cole hesitated. He almost lied. Then something about the silence in the diner made honesty easier. Bitterroot Valley. The waitress froze slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. But Cole noticed everything. Visiting family? She asked carefully. Maybe. He pulled the folded deed from his jacket pocket and unfolded it on the table. The woman's eyes dropped immediately to the name, Nathan Barrett. Something changed in her face. Fear, not panic. Recognition, the kind that comes from old memories people wish had stayed buried. You knew him, Cole said quietly. The waitress looked toward the kitchen as if making sure nobody else was listening. Then she lowered her voice. Everybody around those parts knew Nathan Barrett. Everybody. Cole studied her carefully. What kind of man was he? The woman stared out the frosted window for several long seconds before answering. Quiet. That wasn't helpful. Cole waited. Finally, she sighed. Your father wasn't the kind of man people forgot, she said softly. He kept mostly to himself, but every now and then folks around the valley would notice strange things. What kind of things? Lights out in the woods at night, trucks driving old logging roads nobody used anymore, men from out of town asking questions. She paused. Nathan always looked like he was expecting trouble. Cole felt tension coil slowly in his chest. The waitress pointed at the deed. You really heading out there? That's the plan. Her expression tightened immediately. Then listen carefully. She leaned closer. Some places are buried for a reason. The words settled heavily between them. Before Cole could ask another question, the front door opened, and freezing wind swept through the diner. Two men walked inside. Both wore heavy black jackets. Construction boots. Ball caps pulled low. Cole's instincts reacted instantly. Not because the men looked dangerous, because they scanned the room too carefully. The taller one noticed Cole immediately, then noticed Shadow. His eyes lingered for half a second too long. Cole looked away first. Never challenge, never escalate. Old habits. The waitress suddenly straightened. You be careful out there, she whispered quickly before stepping away toward another table. The two men ordered coffee at the counter without ever sitting down. Cole drank the rest of his coffee slowly. Shadow remained perfectly still beneath the table, but the dog's ears stayed locked toward the newcomers, watching, listening, waiting. 10 minutes later, Cole paid cash and left. Outside, the wind had calmed, but dark clouds still clung to the distant mountains like bruises against the horizon. Bitterroot Valley waited somewhere beyond them. He climbed into the truck. The old engine groaned painfully before finally starting. Shadow immediately turned toward the highway. Alert again, Cole pulled out of the truck stop and headed south. For the first hour, the road cut through open country, snow-covered ranches, frozen creeks, rusted fences stretching across endless white fields. The mountains grew larger with every mile. Dark pine forests swallowed the lower slopes beneath thick layers of snow. Beautiful country, lonely country. Cole drove mostly in silence. Every now and then Shadow shifted beside him, pressing lightly against his leg whenever the nightmares started creeping close. Cole hated how obvious they'd become. It didn't take much anymore. A loud sound, a smell, the wrong kind of silence. As the truck climbed higher into the mountains, a construction crew appeared ahead, blocking one lane of traffic. Men in reflective jackets worked beside heavy equipment, while orange lights flashed through the snow. Then came the sound. Thump, thump, thump. Helicopter blades. Cole's hands tightened violently around the steering wheel. The world shifted instantly. The snowy highway vanished. Desert heat replaced it. Gunfire echoed somewhere beyond spinning rotor blades. Smoke, screaming. Corporal Jensen crawling through dirt with half his leg missing. Cole sucked in a sharp breath. His vision blurred. Not here. Not now. The helicopter passed low overhead carrying construction supplies toward the mountains, but Cole was already spiraling. His breathing became shallow. Fast. His pulse hammered painfully against old scars buried deep beneath memory. Then suddenly, weighed against his chest. Warm fur. Shadow. The German Shepherd climbed partially into Cole's lap despite the moving truck, pressing hard against him with calm physical force, grounding him, pulling him back. Cole gritted his teeth, focused on the dog's breathing. One inhale, one exhale. Slow, steady, real. The highway slowly returned. The snow, the mountains, the steering wheel beneath his hands. "You're okay," Cole whispered hoarsely. Maybe he meant it for himself. Shadow stayed close another few minutes before finally settling back down. Cole wiped sweat from his forehead despite the freezing air inside the truck. 44 years old, decorated Navy SEAL. And sometimes a sound could still reduce him to a terrified young man bleeding in foreign sand. That was the ugly truth nobody put in recruitment commercials. The war followed you home. Every time. Every time. By late afternoon, the highway narrowed into older mountain roads lined with towering pine forests. Cell service disappeared completely. Civilization faded fast. Abandoned gas stations appeared every few miles. Collapsed logging mills rusted beneath the snow. Old signs leaned crooked beside empty roads. Bitterroot Timber, Sawmill Road, no trespassing. Cole finally stopped at a small pull-off, overlooking a frozen river winding through the valley below. The mountains here felt different. Heavier somehow. Ancient. The kind of wilderness that swallowed secrets whole. Shadow jumped from the truck immediately and paced toward the tree line. Cole noticed it then. Fresh tire tracks in the snow behind them. Large SUV tires. Recent. His stomach tightened. A moment later, black paint flashed briefly between the distant trees far down the road. The same SUV. Watching again, Cole stared at it for several long seconds. The vehicle never moved closer. Never approached. Just stayed there, patient. Shadow let out a low growl. The sound echoed softly through the frozen valley. Cole looked toward the mountains ahead. Toward the land his father had hidden from the world for nearly 20 years. Toward whatever secret, powerful men were still hunting. Then he put the truck back into gear. Snow began falling again as Cole Barrett and his aging war dog disappeared deeper into Bitterroot Valley, and somewhere beyond the trees, the black SUV followed. Cole saw it twice more before sunset. Always distant, always silent. A flicker of black paint between snow-covered pines. The brief reflection of headlights rounding curves far behind him. Never close enough to confront. Never far enough to ignore. Whoever they were, they wanted him nervous. It was working. The mountain road narrowed as daylight, faded into a bruised gray evening. Snow fell steadily now, dusting the windshield faster than the truck's ancient wipers could clear it. On either side of the road, towering lodgepole pines pressed inward like dark walls. Shadow sat upright beside him, watching, listening. The dog had barely relaxed for hours. Every now and then his ears twitched toward the woods, followed by that same low growl deep in his chest. Cole trusted that sound. Dogs noticed what men missed, especially military dogs, especially Shadow. The road finally ended near an old, rusted gate half buried in snow. Privet property. The sign hung crooked from one chain. Cole killed the engine. Silence rushed in immediately, the kind only deep wilderness could create. No traffic, no voices, only distant wind moving through frozen trees. Cole stepped out into knee-deep snow and stared beyond the gate. A narrow dirt road disappeared into the forest ahead. This was it. Nathan Barrett's land. Or what was left of it. Shadow jumped down beside him and immediately became alert, not cautious, excited. The German Shepherd pulled hard toward the old road, nose working furiously beneath the falling snow. Cole frowned. "What is it?" Shadow barked once and strained harder against the leash. The dog wanted forward. Badly. Cole glanced back down the mountain road. No sign of the SUV now. Only darkness swallowing the trees. Still, that feeling remained. Being watched. He opened the gate slowly. Rust groaned through the frozen silence. Then Cole climbed back into the truck and drove deeper into the property. The dirt road twisted through thick pine forest for nearly a mile before the trees suddenly opened. And there it was. The farmhouse sat beside a frozen lake, beneath the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains. Cole slowed instinctively. For several seconds, he simply stared. The place looked abandoned by time itself. A two-story wooden farmhouse crouched near the shoreline, weathered gray by decades of snow and wind. One side of the porch sagged badly. Snow covered the roof in thick, uneven layers. Several windows were boarded shut. Beyond the house stood an old red barn leaning slightly beneath the weight of winter. A broken windmill creaked slowly nearby. Everything felt still, forgotten, yet strangely untouched. Like the entire valley had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to return. Shadow exploded into motion. The instant Cole parked, the dog lunged from the truck and sprinted across the snow toward the barn. Shadow. The shepherd ignored him completely. Cole grabbed his jacket and followed fast through the deep snow. Shadow reached the barn doors and immediately began scratching at them wildly. Whining, pacing, excited, Cole stopped several feet away, confused. "What the hell's gotten into you?" Shadow barked sharply and pawed harder at the wood, then suddenly froze. His ears lifted. The dog turned slowly toward the farmhouse, staring. Cole followed his gaze. For one brief second, he thought he saw movement behind one of the upstairs windows, a shadow crossing the glass. Then nothing. Cole's pulse tightened instantly. He scanned the property carefully. No footprints except theirs. No vehicle tracks. No smoke from the chimney. Still, something about the place felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly. Occupied, as though the house itself remembered people. Shadow whined softly and moved toward the farmhouse now with urgent determination. Cole approached carefully. The front porch groaned beneath his boots. Snow drifted through broken railing posts. The old front door stood weathered but solid, a faded brass handle still attached, locked. Cole tried the side windows next, also locked. Then he noticed the key, hidden above the porch light beneath a loose wooden plank. He froze. Nathan had left it there intentionally, waiting. For him. Cole swallowed hard. The old key turned stiffly inside the lock. Then the door creaked open. Cold air rolled outward, carrying the smell of dust, cedarwood, and old memories. Shadow entered first, slowly this time. Carefully, Cole followed into darkness. The beam from his flashlight swept across frozen silence. Furniture covered in white sheets, dust hanging thick in the air. A stone fireplace stretching floor to ceiling. An old leather recliner near the window. Everything exactly where someone had left it years ago. Cole closed the door behind them. The storm outside intensified immediately, wind rattling the old windows. Shadow moved room to room with strange familiarity, not sniffing randomly, searching. Cole's chest tightened. The dog acted like he knew this place. The kitchen looked untouched. Pots still hanging near the stove. Coffee mugs beside the sink. A faded flannel jacket hanging near the back door. Cole stared at it, his father's. The sight hit unexpectedly hard, because suddenly Nathan Barrett wasn't some distant, bitter memory anymore. He had been real, alive, standing in this exact room, once. Cole reached out slowly and touched the sleeve. Still smelled faintly of cedar and motor oil. The same smell he remembered from childhood. A sharp ache spread through his chest. Shadow barked suddenly from another room. Cole followed the sound into what looked like a small office near the back of the house. Then he stopped cold. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. An entire wall was covered in photographs. Photographs of him. Cole stepped closer slowly. SEAL graduation ceremony, deployment newspaper articles, military commendations, pictures taken from far away outside bases. One photo showed him leaving a hospital in Virginia after surgery 8 years earlier. Another captured him standing beside his ex-wife outside a grocery store. His throat tightened. How? The wall beside the photographs held a giant map covered in colored pins. Every military base he had ever been stationed at. Every deployment. Every move. Nathan Barrett had tracked his entire life. For years. Cole sank slowly into the old desk chair. The room blurred. His father had known. Everything. All those years, Cole believed the old man simply stopped caring. Nathan had been watching from a distance the entire time. A sharp, painful memory surfaced suddenly. Age 19. A bus station in San Diego before BUD.S training. Cole looking around the terminal and briefly thinking he saw his father standing across the street beside a payphone. He remembered being angry then, too proud to call out, too hurt to chase after him. Now he wondered if it had actually been real. Shadow walked quietly beside him and rested his head against Cole's knee. Cole stared at the wall of photographs, at all the years lost between them. The loneliness inside the room felt enormous, not empty, heavy. The storm outside deepened into full blizzard conditions by nightfall. Snow hammered the windows, as wind screamed across the frozen lake. Cole eventually started a fire using old logs stacked beside the hearth. Orange flames flickered across the dusty walls, while Shadow lay nearby watching the storm beyond the glass. For the first time in months, Cole almost felt safe. Then, his eyes drifted toward the fireplace. Something looked strange about the stonework near the bottom. Scratches, fresh scratches. He stood slowly, walked closer. The marks looked recent, almost clawed into the stone itself. Shadow rose instantly. The dog approached the fireplace with sudden intensity, then began barking violently. Not playful, not curious. Warning. Cole frowned. Shadow. The dog scratched furiously at the lower stones, growling now, desperate. Cole knelt beside him. One stone near the foundation looked slightly different from the others. Cleaner, less dust, as though someone had touched it recently. A cold feeling crawled slowly through Cole's stomach. Outside, lightning flashed silently through the blizzard. Then, crack! A distant tree snapped somewhere across the lake. Shadow barked harder. Cole placed his hand against the loose stone, and deep beneath the storm, he thought he heard something hollow behind the wall. Cole slowly pulled his hand away from the stone. Shadow barked again, sharper this time, claws scraping furiously across the lower bricks of the fireplace foundation. "What is it, boy?" The German shepherd whined and pawed harder. Cole grabbed the flashlight from the table and crouched lower beside the hearth. The beam slid across old mortar lines blackened by decades of smoke. Most of the stones were rough and uneven, except one, near the bottom right corner. Cleaner, slightly recessed. His pulse slowed into that dangerous military calm again, the kind that always came before something bad. Cole pressed against the loose stone carefully. Nothing. He pushed harder. A faint grinding noise echoed behind the wall. Then the stone shifted inward half an inch. Shadow immediately stepped backward and growled low in his throat. Cole frowned. Well, that's not creepy at all. The storm slammed against the cabin windows hard enough to rattle the glass. He wedged his fingers into the gap and pulled. The stone came loose, surprisingly easy. Cold air rushed out from the dark cavity behind it, carrying the smell of dust, rusted metal, and something older he couldn't identify. Cole angled the flashlight inside. A metal box sat hidden behind the wall. Military green. Heavy, about the size of an old ammo case. His stomach tightened instantly. Nathan Barrett had hidden it there deliberately. Shadow stopped barking the moment Cole touched the box. Now the dog simply watched, waiting. Cole carefully lifted the container onto the wooden floor beside the fire. No lock, no markings, just years of dust. For several long seconds he stared at it without opening it. His father's secrets had already changed too much tonight. Part of him suddenly understood why Nathan had spent his whole life looking over his shoulder. Some truths carried weight, and once you uncovered them, you couldn't bury them again. Finally, Cole lifted the lid. Inside sat several old cassette tapes wrapped carefully in cloth, a stack of weathered notebooks, and a brass key attached to a leather cord. Cole picked up the key first. Heavy, cold. Military coordinates had been engraved into the metal by hand. 47 degree, 1432. No, 114 degrees, 5211. Bitterroot Valley, somewhere nearby. Shadow leaned closer immediately, sniffing the key with intense focus. You recognize this? The dog's ears lifted slightly. Cole felt another chill crawl through him. Then he opened one of the notebooks. The handwriting was unmistakable. Nathan's. Page after page filled with diagrams, coordinates, coded notes, and technical sketches Cole barely understood. Electrical grids, underground tunnel layouts, surveillance systems. One phrase appeared over and over. Station Echo. Cole flipped several more pages, then stopped cold. There were military insignias sketched into the margins. Old ones. Cold War era. The realization settled slowly into place. Nathan Barrett had not been just a mechanic. He had military training. Extensive training. Far beyond anything Cole ever knew. A sudden crack of thunder shook the cabin. The lights from the fire flickered wildly across the walls. Cole picked up one of the cassette tapes. The label simply read, "If he returns." His chest tightened. He looked around the room instinctively. The storm outside had grown violent now. Wind screamed across the frozen lake, hard enough to shake the entire cabin. Shadow suddenly stiffened. Every muscle locked. The dog turned slowly toward the front windows, growling, not barking anymore. This was different. Pure warning. Cole's instincts reacted instantly. He killed the flashlight. The room fell into darkness, except for the fire. Snow whipped violently outside. Then, movement. A shadow crossing past the porch. Cole's hand dropped automatically toward the combat knife on his belt. Shadow moved silently toward the door. Another shadow appeared outside the window. Fast. Gone again. Cole's heartbeat slowed dangerously. Combat mode. The old reflexes flooded back before he could stop them. Distance. Cover. Exit points. Threat angles, all calculated automatically. Then, bang. The rifle shot exploded through the cabin. Glass shattered inward violently. Wood splintered beside the fireplace. Shadow lunged instantly through the broken window before Cole could even react. The dog disappeared into the blizzard with a furious bark. Shadow. Cole dropped low behind the couch as another shot tore through the front wall. Whoever was outside had a clear angle on the cabin. Professional enough not to waste ammunition, Cole crawled toward the side window carefully and risked a glance outside. Nothing, only swirling snow and darkness, then movement near the trees. A figure running, black winter jacket, rifle, fast. Shadow exploded from the storm and tackled the man near the porch. A violent struggle flashed briefly through the blowing snow. The attacker screamed. Cole surged toward the front door but stopped himself just short of throwing it open. Too exposed, too easy. His breathing sharpened. Think, not emotion, training. The figure shoved Shadow backward and disappeared into the woods. Moments later, an engine roared somewhere beyond the trees. Vehicle tires spun against ice, then silence returned. Cole yanked the door open and ran outside. Shadow! The blizzard hit like a wall. Snow burned against his face while wind howled across the property. Then the dog emerged from darkness, limping slightly through the drifts. Alive, Cole dropped to one knee immediately. "You hit?" Shadow pressed against him heavily but stayed standing. Cole ran quick hands along the dog's body. No blood, no bullet wound, just shaken. The shepherd's lips curled back toward the woods in a low growl. Whoever attacked them had escaped. Cole stared toward the tree line. Adrenaline pumped hard through his veins now. Somebody knew he was here. Not coincidence. Not random. The black SUV, the rifle, the surveillance, all connected. And somehow Nathan Barrett knew this would happen. Cole pulled Shadow back inside and barricaded the shattered window with an old table and blankets against the cold. The fire crackled harder as wind pushed smoke unevenly down the chimney. The cabin suddenly felt smaller now, more vulnerable. Like a trap, Cole sat beside the fireplace with the metal box open before him while Shadow rested nearby watching the darkness beyond the broken window. Neither of them relaxed. Not fully. Cole stared at the cassette tape in his hand. If he returns. Slowly, he stood and searched through the office drawers until he found it. An old cassette recorder buried beneath stacks of papers. Dusty. Ancient. But intact. He inserted fresh batteries from his truck emergency kit with trembling fingers, then carefully slid the tape inside. The machine clicked softly. Static hissed through the speaker. For several seconds there was nothing except crackling interference. Then, a voice. Older. Rough. Tired. Nathan Barrett. "If you're hearing this," the voice said quietly, "then Shadow brought you home." Cole froze completely. The sound of his father's voice after all these years hit harder than the gunfire. Shadow lifted his head immediately at the sound, as if he recognized it too. Nathan coughed softly on the tape. "I don't have much time anymore. If you found the box, it means they're probably already watching the property again." Cole's pulse quickened. Nathan continued, "You need to understand something, son. The land isn't valuable because of the house." Static crackled. Then, "It's what's underneath it that matters." Cole leaned closer, unconsciously. "The people looking for it?" Nathan's voice lowered carefully. "They've been searching since the early '80s. Powerful men, dangerous men, Men willing to kill for what's buried here. Outside, the wind slammed violently against the cabin again. Shadow suddenly growled toward the darkness beyond the shattered window. Nathan's voice continued through static. I hid it because I ran out of choices, and because I knew someday they'd come back. Cole swallowed hard. Then came the sentence that turned his blood cold. If Shadow brought you here, then they finally found me. The tape abruptly clicked off. Silence swallowed the room except for the storm. Cole stared at the recorder, then slowly looked toward the old barn visible through blowing snow outside, toward the coordinates engraved into the brass key, toward whatever secret had gotten his father killed. Shadow rose silently beside him. And for the first time since arriving in Bitterroot Valley, Cole realized this was never an inheritance. It was a warning. The storm raged harder outside the cabin, wind shrieking across the frozen lake like something alive in the darkness. Snow blasted against the boarded windows in thick white waves, while the fire crackled unevenly inside the stone hearth. Cole sat motionless beside the cassette recorder. Nathan Barrett's voice still echoed inside his head. If Shadow brought you here, then they finally found me. The words settled into his chest like cold iron. Shadow stood near the broken window, staring into the storm beyond the barricade. Every few seconds, the German shepherd's ears twitched toward the woods, listening, waiting. Cole looked at the brass key again, then at the coordinates engraved into the metal. Whatever his father hid beneath this land had terrified powerful people for decades, and now those people knew Cole was here. A sudden thud outside made Shadow explode into a bark. Cole was already moving, knife in hand, heart hammering. He crossed to the side window carefully and peered through a narrow gap in the blanket covering the shattered glass. Nothing, only darkness and blowing snow. Then, a shape emerged briefly near the tree line. Human, moving fast. Cole yanked open the front door and stepped onto the porch. Hey! The figure disappeared instantly into the storm. Cole's military instincts screamed not to pursue blindly at night, especially unfamiliar terrain, especially during a blizzard. But Shadow bolted off the porch before Cole could stop him. Shadow! The shepherd vanished into the white darkness. Cole cursed under his breath and sprinted after him. Snow swallowed his boots nearly to the knees as he pushed across the yard toward the trees. Wind tore through his jacket while visibility dropped to almost nothing. Shadow! No answer. Only the storm. Cole reached the forest edge, breathing hard. His shoulder ached sharply in the cold. Then came the sound, a growl, followed by shouting somewhere ahead in the woods. Cole moved faster. Branches whipped against his face while snow-covered ground slipped dangerously beneath his boots. Then suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the trees. Everything inside Cole froze. Not again. Not the dog. Shadow. He ran harder now. Blind panic replacing discipline. The woods opened into a narrow clearing beside an abandoned logging trail. And there, Shadow emerged from the storm limping badly. Dark blood stained the snow beneath one shoulder. Cole dropped instantly to his knees. Oh God. The shepherd stumbled toward him, still growling toward the darkness behind him, protecting him, even now. Cole grabbed the dog carefully and pulled him behind a fallen log just as another distant shout echoed through the trees. Men, at least two, searching. Cole pressed low into the snow beside Shadow. The old combat instincts returned fully now. Calm, precise, dangerously clear. He listened. Footsteps, somewhere uphill. Voices barely audible beneath the wind. They went this way. Spread out. Cole's jaw tightened. Not random hunters. Not trespassers. These men were looking specifically for them. Shadow whimpered softly. Cole quickly examined the wound using his flashlight beneath his coat to hide the beam. The bullet had grazed the dog's shoulder. Bad, but not fatal. Thank God. Still bleeding heavily, though. Shadow's breathing trembled. Cole pressed his forehead briefly against the dog's neck. You're okay, he whispered roughly. Stay with me, buddy. Another flashlight beam swept through the trees nearby. Too close. Cole grabbed snow and smeared it quickly across Shadow's dark fur to dull the blood trail. Then he pulled the dog deeper behind the log and held completely still. The voices moved closer. Crunching boots, wind, metal clinking softly, weapons. Cole's pulse slowed into ice. He remembered nights like this overseas, waiting in darkness, while armed men hunted through ruined villages. Only now he wasn't protecting soldiers. He was protecting the last living thing that still loved him, A flashlight beam slid across the clearing only 20 feet away. Cole tightened his grip on the knife. One man appeared through the storm. Black winter jacket, rifle. Same build as the figure outside the cabin earlier. The man stopped suddenly, studying the snow, tracking blood. Cole's muscles tensed. Then Shadow let out the faintest growl. The man's head snapped toward them instantly. Cole moved first. Fast, violent, silent. Years of SEAL training exploded back into his body before fear could interfere. He surged from behind the log and slammed into the armed man hard enough to drive him backward into the snow. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the trees. Cole ripped the weapon away and shoved the man down hard. For one brief second, the attacker's flashlight illuminated his face. Mid-30s, beard, professional, not local. The man swung a fist. Cole blocked automatically and drove his elbow into the attacker's chest. The man gasped sharply. Then suddenly another voice shouted somewhere deeper in the woods, "Move! Move! Back up!" Cole grabbed the rifle and retreated instantly. No hesitation, no heroics, survival. He dragged Shadow beside him and disappeared into the forest before the others reached the clearing. They didn't stop running until the cabin lights finally appeared through the storm again. By the time Cole slammed the front door shut behind them, both he and the dog were covered in snow and blood. Shadow collapsed near the fireplace. Cole's chest tightened painfully at the sight. The shepherd trembled from exhaustion now, still trying to stay alert, still watching the windows. "You stupid brave dog," Cole whispered. His hands shook slightly as he dug through old kitchen cabinets, searching for anything useful. Bandages, alcohol, needles. Nathan Barrett apparently kept everything. Cole finally found an old first aid kit beneath the sink. He dragged it beside Shadow and carefully cut away fur around the wound. The instant blood touched his hands. The flashback hit. Desert heat. Gunfire. Screaming over the radio. Petty Officer Miller bleeding out in his lap while helicopters circled overhead. Cole's breathing suddenly broke apart. No, not now. His vision blurred violently. The cabin disappeared. Afghanistan swallowed him whole again. Smoke. Blood. Sand. Failure. Shadow lifted his head weakly and pressed his muzzle hard against Cole's chest, grounding him, pulling him back. Cole shut his eyes tightly, focused on the dog's breathing. One inhale. One exhale. Slow. Real. The panic slowly loosened. Barely. Cole wiped his face roughly and forced himself back to work. "You don't get to die on me," he muttered. "You hear me?" Shadow's tail thumped weakly once against the floor. Cole cleaned and wrapped the wound carefully, while the storm continued hammering the cabin outside. By midnight, Shadow finally drifted into exhausted sleep beside the fire. Cole sat nearby holding the rifle he'd taken from the attacker. No serial number. Professional. Cleaned. Untraceable. His father hadn't exaggerated. These people were dangerous. Cole stared toward the cassette recorder again, then slowly inserted another tape from the metal box. Static hissed. Nathan's voice returned. Older now. Warier. "I don't know how much time I've got left," Nathan said quietly. "If you're hearing this, then things already went bad." Cole leaned closer. "The men looking for this place aren't just after money. They're after proof." Static crackled loudly. Then, what's hidden beneath this land could destroy people powerful enough to bury entire towns. Cole's pulse tightened. Nathan coughed harshly on the recording. "I tried going to the authorities once," he continued. "That mistake cost people their lives." Outside, wind slammed hard against the cabin again. Shadow stirred uneasily in his sleep. Nathan's voice lowered further. "There's a bunker beneath the property. Everything I collected is down there. Maps, evidence, names." A pause. "And if they know you're here, they'll never stop hunting for it." Cole slowly looked toward the old barn outside, toward the darkness beyond the storm. Then Nathan said the sentence that froze him completely. "I trained Shadow for this, son." Cole's breath caught. The tape hissed softly. "He was always meant to bring you home." Cole stared at the sleeping German shepherd beside the fire. Memories surfaced slowly now. Nathan occasionally disappearing for weeks when Cole was younger. Returning with military dogs sometimes, training them behind locked barn doors. Cole had never understood why. Now he did. Nathan had prepared for this years before his death, prepared Shadow. Prepared the land, prepared everything. Everything except the damage it would do to his son. The tape clicked off abruptly. Silence filled the cabin again. Cole sat there for a very long time beside the fire, watching the storm, watching Shadow breathe, listening to the mountains groan beneath winter winds. Then finally he looked toward the old red barn standing dark beside the frozen lake. Whatever waited beneath that building, people were willing to kill for it. And somehow, after all these years, his father had trusted only the dog to lead him there. Morning arrived gray and brutal over Bitterroot Valley. The storm had finally passed during the night, leaving behind a frozen silence so complete it almost felt unnatural. Snow blanketed the property in deep, untouched drifts that sparkled beneath weak winter sunlight. Cole barely noticed any of it. He stood near the cabin window, holding a mug of black coffee gone cold in his hands, while staring toward the old red barn beside the lake. The place looked different now. Not abandoned. Waiting. Shadow limped slowly across the room behind him, bandages wrapped tightly around his shoulder. The German shepherd moved carefully, but refused to stay down for long. "You should rest," Cole muttered. Shadow ignored him completely. Typical. The dog stopped beside the front door and stared toward the barn again, then looked back at Cole. Waiting. Cole exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know. The rifle attack changed everything. Until now, part of him still believed he could walk away from all this, leave the property behind, drive south, disappear into another state the way he'd disappeared from most of his own life already. But somebody tried to kill them last night, which meant Nathan Barrett had been telling the truth. The land held something worth protecting, something worth murdering for. Cole grabbed the brass key from the table and slipped the cassette tapes carefully into his backpack. Then he checked the rifle he'd taken from the attacker. Loaded, professional grade, no identifying marks. Shadow barked once at the door, impatient now. "All right." Cole opened the front door, and freezing air rushed inside immediately. The lake beyond the cabin looked like solid gray steel beneath the winter sky. Pine trees ringed the valley in endless silence, while distant mountains disappeared into low clouds. Beautiful country, deadly country. Shadow moved ahead carefully through the snow toward the barn, nose low, body tense despite the injury. Cole followed close behind. Every instinct remained alert now, watching the woods, listening for engines, for footsteps, for the black SUV. Nothing moved except wind-blown snow across the frozen ground. The old barn groaned softly as they approached. Up close, the structure looked older than the farmhouse by decades. Red paint peeled away in long, weathered strips, revealing dark gray wood beneath. One side leaned slightly inward from years of heavy winters. Shadow reached the large sliding doors and immediately began sniffing along the bottom edge. Then he stopped. One sharp bark. Cole pulled the doors open slowly. The smell hit first. Dust, hay, rust, old machinery. Light spilled through cracks in the walls, illuminating floating particles drifting through the cold air like tiny ghosts. Inside sat the remains of a forgotten life, broken farming equipment, stacks of lumber, oil drums, an old workbench covered in tools. Everything frozen in time. Shadow ignored all of it. The dog limped directly toward the far end of the barn near a pile of collapsed tarps and began clawing at the wooden floorboards. Cole approached cautiously. "What do you see?" Shadow barked harder. Cole knelt beside him and brushed away dust and straw. At first the floor looked ordinary. Then he noticed the scratches. Fresh, circular marks worn into the wood. As though something heavy had once rotated there, his pulse quickened. Cole shoved aside the tarps completely. A large metal ring emerged from beneath years of dirt and hay, embedded directly into the floor. "Jesus." Shadow backed away slightly, ears lifted. Cole grabbed the ring with both hands and pulled. Nothing. Locked. He frowned, then remembered the brass key. Slowly, he examined the surrounding floorboards, until finally spotting it. A small hidden keyhole near one corner beneath a rusted hinge plate. The brass key slid in perfectly. For one brief moment, nothing happened. Then, clunk. Somewhere deep beneath the barn, ancient machinery groaned awake. Cole stepped backward instantly. Dust rained from the rafters. The floor vibrated softly beneath his boots. Then the wooden boards in the center of the barn slowly split apart. A hydraulic hatch emerged from beneath decades of hidden earth. Cole stared in disbelief as a rectangular opening revealed concrete stairs descending into darkness below. Cold air drifted upward, carrying the faint smell of oil, metal, and underground stone. Shadow growled softly beside him. Cole looked around the valley instinctively, still silent, still empty. Then he pulled the rifle tighter against his shoulder and descended into the darkness. The bunker stretched far deeper underground than he expected. Concrete walls, steel support beams, old fluorescent lights flickering weakly to life overhead as motion sensors activated one by one. Nathan Barrett hadn't built a hiding place. He'd built a fortress. Cole descended slowly while Shadow stayed close beside him. The air underground felt strangely warm compared to the freezing valley above. The staircase opened into a massive chamber hidden beneath the property. Cole stopped cold. Rows of military-grade filing cabinets lined the walls. Old radio equipment blinked faintly beneath layers of dust. Large maps covered entire sections of concrete wall, marked with pins and handwritten notes. Generators hummed softly somewhere deeper underground. The bunker still had power. How the hell? Cole turned slowly in disbelief. This place represented years of work, years of preparation, and enormous money. None of it matched the lonely mechanic he thought his father had been. Shadow moved ahead through the bunker with growing agitation. The dog clearly recognized the place. Cole's stomach tightened again. Nathan really had trained him for this. He approached one of the maps slowly. Bitterroot Valley. Hundreds of markings circled old logging roads, waterways, abandoned mining sites, and parcels of private land. Certain areas had been highlighted heavily in red ink. One name appeared repeatedly across dozens of notes. Victor Hale. Cole frowned. Nearby, stacks of documents filled several open crates. He picked up one folder carefully. Environmental reports. Chemical contamination studies. Photographs. His jaw tightened immediately. The images showed dead wildlife near poisoned streams, collapsed workers inside old logging camps, children in hospital beds. Another file contained satellite photographs of industrial dumping sites hidden deep in protected wilderness. Illegal operations, massive ones. And Victor Hale's company name appeared across nearly every document. Hale Development Group. Cole felt anger rising slowly beneath the shock. His father had spent decades documenting crimes, real crimes, the kind powerful corporations buried with lawyers and money. Shadow barked suddenly from farther inside the bunker. Cole followed quickly. The next chamber looked more personal. Shelves filled with canned food, medical supplies, cash sealed inside waterproof containers, emergency weapons. Nathan Barrett had prepared for war underground. Then Cole noticed the newspaper clipping taped beside an old desk. Local man killed in logging accident. Nathan Barrett's photograph stared back at him. Cole stepped closer slowly. A handwritten note had been scribbled across the edge in red ink. They got too close. His chest tightened painfully. Nathan's death had not been an accident. The old man knew it before he died. Cole lowered himself slowly into the chair beside the desk. The weight of it all hit hard. His father spent decades hiding underground, collecting evidence against dangerous people, alone, watching over his son from a distance, waiting for enemies that finally caught up with him. And now those same enemies were hunting Cole. Shadow suddenly growled low again. Cole looked up instantly. At the far end of the bunker stood another door. Steel, massive. Unlike the other rooms, this one remained sealed, completely shut. No visible handle, no labels, just thick reinforced steel covered in scratches. Shadow stood before it, rigid and tense, growling harder now. Cole approached slowly. Something about the door felt wrong immediately. Not abandoned, hidden, protected, or imprisoned. He ran his hand carefully across the cold steel, then noticed fresh marks near the lock mechanism. Recent scratches. Someone else had tried getting inside. Recently. Cole's pulse slowed again. Outside, somewhere above them, wind moaned softly through the valley. Deep underground beneath Nathan Barrett's land. Something waited behind that steel door. And whatever it was, Shadow was terrified of it. The German shepherd stood rigid before the steel door, lips curled slightly back as a low growl vibrated deep in his chest. Cole had heard that sound before. Not fear alone. Recognition. The bunker lights buzzed faintly overhead, while cold air drifted through the underground chambers. Somewhere beyond the concrete walls, old generators hummed like distant thunder. Cole approached the steel door slowly. Fresh scratches marked the lock plate. Somebody had tried getting inside recently, or tried getting out. His pulse tightened at that thought. Shadow stepped closer to him immediately, pressing against his leg, despite the pain in his wounded shoulder. "It's okay," Cole whispered. But the dog didn't believe him. Neither did Cole. He examined the door carefully. No electronic keypad, no handle, only an old mechanical locking wheel half hidden beneath years of dust. Military design, heavy duty. Nathan Barrett hadn't wanted this room opened easily. Cole gripped the wheel cautiously and turned. At first it resisted completely. Then suddenly, clank. Metal bolts retracted deep inside the wall. Shadow barked sharply. The steel door groaned inward 3 inches. Darkness waited beyond. A strange smell drifted out immediately. Dust, old film reels, machine oil, and something else. Memories. Cole pushed the door wider and raised the flashlight. The beam cut through a room frozen in time. Surveillance monitors lined one wall beneath layers of dust. Old VHS tapes sat stacked beside recording equipment from another era. Filing cabinets filled the corners alongside boxes of photographs and military documents. At the center of the room stood a desk, and directly above it, a photograph of Cole as a child, maybe 8 years old. Standing beside a lake holding a fishing rod while Nathan knelt beside him, smiling faintly, Cole froze. He barely remembered that day, but Nathan clearly had. Shadow moved carefully into the room now, sniffing along the floor with nervous energy. Cole's flashlight swept across the walls. Hundreds of photographs. Not random surveillance anymore. Personal. Deeply personal. Cole at graduation. Cole leaving SEAL training. Cole standing in dress uniform beside teammates. Even photographs of him sitting alone outside VA hospitals years later. Nathan Barrett had spent decades watching over his son from the shadows. Cole swallowed hard. You were there. The realization hurt more than anger ever could. His father had known every failure, every collapse, every lonely year after the war, and still never reached out. Cole stepped toward the desk slowly. An old videotape sat waiting beside a projector. A note in Nathan's handwriting rested on top, for Cole only. His chest tightened painfully. He inserted the tape into the old player nearby and pressed play. Static flickered across the monitor first. Then, the image steadied. Nathan Barrett appeared on screen, older, thinner, gray in the beard, but unmistakably the same man Cole remembered. Nathan looked directly into the camera with exhausted eyes. "If you're watching this," he said quietly, "then I'm already dead." Cole stared silently at the screen. "I'm sorry for what I had to become," Nathan continued, "and I'm sorry for what it turned you into." The room felt smaller suddenly, heavier. Nathan coughed hard into his fist before continuing. "You deserve the truth now." The video shifted briefly to grainy surveillance footage. Black SUVs driving mountain roads, men unloading barrels near rivers, construction sites deep in protected wilderness. Nathan's voice continued over the footage. Victor Hale and his partners buried toxic waste throughout Bitterroot Valley for years. Illegal chemicals, military contaminants, things that poisoned entire towns. Static crackled. When workers got sick, they paid doctors to lie. When locals complained, people disappeared. Cole's jaw tightened slowly. The footage changed again, this time showing Nathan secretly filming armed men near the lake years earlier. "I tried taking evidence to federal investigators once," Nathan said, "but somebody inside the system warned Hale before the investigation could begin." Nathan looked directly into the camera again. "That's when they started threatening you." Cole's stomach dropped. Nathan lowered his eyes briefly before speaking again. "I pushed you away because I thought distance would keep you alive." The words hit harder than Cole expected. "All those years you hated me." Nathan's voice cracked slightly. "I let you." Silence filled the room for several seconds. Then Nathan reached off screen and pulled something into frame. A young German Shepherd puppy. Shadow. Cole stared at the screen in disbelief. The puppy climbed clumsily into Nathan's lap while chewing on an old rope toy. "I trained him for you," Nathan said softly while rubbing the puppy's ears. "Military bloodline. Smart as hell. Loyal to the bone." A faint, sad smile crossed his face. "I knew someday you'd need somebody who wouldn't give up on you." Cole felt something inside him crack quietly. On screen, Nathan continued speaking while the puppy rested calmly beside him. "I taught Shadow this property. Every trail, every hidden entrance, every signal." He looked directly into the camera again. "Because I knew if I couldn't survive this, he'd still bring you home." Cole lowered his eyes. The old ache in his chest became unbearable. All the debt to Divivemund, All those years believing his father abandoned him. All those years believing nobody cared enough to stay. And the truth had been sitting underground beneath a frozen valley waiting for him. Shadow walked over quietly and rested his head against Cole's knee. Cole placed one shaking hand on the dog's neck. The video continued. Nathan's expression darkened. "They'll come eventually," he warned. "Victor Hale will never stop searching for this bunker." He leaned closer to the camera slightly. "There's enough evidence down here to destroy his entire company." Static flashed again. Then Nathan said quietly, "If they find you before you expose it, run." The screen went black. The tape clicked softly inside the machine. Cole sat motionless in the dim bunker light. The silence afterward felt enormous. Shadow remained pressed against him. Steady. Faithful. Alive. Cole finally understood. Nathan Barrett had never stopped being his father. He had simply chosen protection over love visible enough to recognize. A sudden flicker overhead interrupted the moment. The bunker lights dimmed violently, then surged back. Shadow instantly growled. Cole stood fast. The generators. Something was wrong. Another flicker. Then total darkness swallowed the bunker. The hum of electricity died completely. Silence crashed down. Shadow barked sharply. Cole grabbed the flashlight immediately. Its beam cut through darkness just as a loud metallic slam echoed somewhere above them. The barn doors. Somebody was outside. Cole killed the flashlight instinctively. Above them came muffled footsteps crossing the barn floor. Several men this time. Heavy boots. Voices. One shouted through the darkness above. "Search everything." Shadow's growl deepened into something dangerous. Cole's breathing slowed automatically, combat mode returning. The bunker had been discovered, and whoever cut the power knew exactly where to look. Cole stood frozen in the darkness beneath the barn, while footsteps echoed overhead. Heavy boots. Several men. Organized. Shadow pressed tightly against his leg, growling low enough to vibrate through the concrete floor. Cole killed the flashlight completely. Only darkness remained now. The kind of darkness military men learned to survive inside. Above them came the sound of wood scraping violently across the barn floor. They opened something down there. Another voice answered immediately. "Find the hatch." Cole's pulse slowed into pure combat focus. No panic. No hesitation. The transformation happened automatically, like muscle memory buried deep beneath scar tissue and exhaustion. Years disappeared from him in seconds. The homeless drifter vanished. The Navy SEAL returned. Cole crouched beside Shadow and whispered softly into the dog's ear. "Quiet now." Shadow immediately obeyed. Outside the bunker door, distant metallic pounding echoed through the underground chambers. The men were searching the barn. They would find the entrance eventually. Cole's mind moved fast. Inventory. Routes. Weapons. Options. The bunker map flashed through his memory. Nathan built emergency exits. He had to. Cole swept one hand carefully along the concrete wall until his fingers brushed old wiring panels near the surveillance room. Then he found it. A manual power switch. He flipped it. Emergency red lights flickered weakly alive across the bunker, dim enough to conceal movement, bright enough to navigate. Shadow moved instantly toward a narrow hallway at the far end of the bunker. The dog already knew where to go. Of course he did. Nathan trained him here. Cole followed quickly while the sounds above grew louder. Crash! Wood splintered somewhere overhead. "They're underneath us!" Cole and Shadow entered a cramped utility corridor lined with pipes and ancient ventilation systems. The walls narrowed tighter as they moved deeper underground. Then suddenly, a deafening metallic slam echoed behind them. The hatch had been breached. Voices flooded the bunker above. "Spread out. Search every room. Find the evidence." Cole pushed faster through the corridor. The red emergency lights painted everything blood-colored around them. Shadow suddenly stopped ahead, growled. Cole looked up. Another steel ladder climbed vertically toward a circular hatch in the ceiling. Emergency exit. He slung the rifle across his shoulder and climbed first. The hatch opened beneath deep snow outside. Cold mountain air hit instantly. They emerged near the frozen edge of the lake almost 50 yards from the barn. Snow had started falling again. Hard. Wind screamed across the valley. Perfect cover. Cole turned immediately toward the property. Flashlights moved wildly inside the barn now. At least 6 men, maybe more. One black SUV sat near the farmhouse beside another pickup truck Cole hadn't seen before. Professional operation. Fast. Organized. These weren't hired locals. Victor Hale had sent specialists. Shadow barked once toward the woods uphill. Cole followed the dog's gaze. Movement. Two armed men circling toward their position. They're sweeping the perimeter. Cole grabbed Shadow's collar gently. Come on. They disappeared into the forest, seconds before flashlight beams cut across the lake behind them. The wilderness swallowed them whole. Snow-covered pines towered overhead, while darkness deepened beneath the branches. Wind bent entire trees with long groaning sounds that echoed through the mountains. Cole moved carefully despite the storm. Every sense alert, every instinct sharpened. Shadow stayed close beside him, limping but determined. Then the first flashlight beam appeared behind them through the trees. They're heading uphill. Cole accelerated immediately. The old logging trails Nathan mapped through the valley became their lifeline now. Snow concealed footprints quickly beneath the storm, but Shadow still paused occasionally to sniff directions before leading them onward. The dog knew these mountains better than any map. Another shout echoed behind them. Closer now. Cole's knee screamed with pain as they climbed steeper terrain. Old combat injuries flared hard in the freezing air, but adrenaline kept him moving. For now. Shadow suddenly stopped near a fallen cedar tree. Growled. Cole dropped instantly behind cover. Seconds later, two armed men appeared below them between the trees. Black winter gear, rifles, night vision goggles. Definitely professionals. One scanned uphill with a flashlight while the other spoke quietly into a radio. Negative visual. They're moving toward the North Ridge. Cole studied them carefully. Disciplined movement. Good spacing. Military contractors, maybe. Victor Hale wasn't just protecting illegal dumping operations anymore. He was protecting something much bigger. The second man lowered his radio. We should have killed Barrett when we had the chance. Cole's jaw tightened instantly. Barrett, not Nathan. Him. They had expected Cole to come eventually. Shadow tensed beside him. The dog's body trembled with controlled aggression. Cole placed one hand lightly against the shepherd's neck. Not yet. The men moved closer. Too close. Snow muffled nearly all sound now except wind tearing through branches overhead. Then suddenly, one of the men stopped directly below their position. The flashlight beam began sweeping upward. Cole's muscles locked. The beam climbed higher. Then Shadow exploded forward. The German shepherd launched downhill like a black missile through the snow. The first man barely had time to react before Shadow slammed into him hard enough to send both crashing backward into a drift. The second man raised his rifle instantly. Cole fired first. One controlled shot into the air beside him, not to kill, to disorient. The gunshot shattered the mountain silence. The second attacker stumbled backward instinctively. Shadow tore free from the first man and lunged again. Chaos erupted instantly beneath the trees. Cole charged downhill through the snow and slammed into the second man before he recovered. The two crashed hard against frozen ground. The rifle spun away into darkness. The attacker swung fast. Professional. Cole blocked automatically and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. Years of SEAL training returned with terrifying ease now. Movement. Pressure. Control. The man reached for a sidearm. Cole pinned the wrist hard against the snow, then froze. A red laser sight appeared suddenly across his chest. Third shooter, somewhere behind the trees. Don't move. Cole shoved the attacker sideways and rolled hard behind a fallen log just as gunfire exploded through the forest. Snow erupted around them. Shadow barked furiously. Cole crawled fast through deep drifts while bullets cracked through branches overhead. The storm had become a battlefield. The attackers spread through the trees strategically now, cutting off escape routes. Military tactics. Coordinated. Cole grabbed the fallen rifle from the snow and pulled Shadow beside him. The dog limped heavily now. Blood stained fresh snow behind his injured shoulder. Too much blood. Stay with me, buddy. Shadow pressed against him despite the pain. Another burst of gunfire echoed nearby. Then silence again. Worse, somehow. The men were repositioning. Hunting. Cole looked uphill through blowing snow. An old logging bridge crossed a narrow ravine about 50 yards ahead. Half collapsed. Dangerous, but defensible. He pointed toward it. Move. They ran. Wind howled louder across the ridge now, while darkness swallowed the valley below. The bridge creaked violently beneath Cole's boots as they crossed. Old wood groaned beneath snow and ice. Halfway across, Shadow suddenly stopped, growled. Cole turned instantly. Flashlights emerged through the trees behind them. 3 men advancing fast. One raised a shotgun. "Cole!" The voice echoed strangely through the storm. A new voice, smooth, calm, confident. Victor Hale himself stepped from the trees beneath a heavy winter coat, older than Cole expected. Silver hair, expensive boots, predator eyes. "You have something that belongs to me," Hale called across the wind. Cole kept moving backward across the bridge. The shotgun remained aimed directly at him. Victor Hale smiled faintly. "Your father made terrible choices, son." Cole's grip tightened on the rifle. "He died because he wouldn't let go." Hale took another slow step forward. "You don't have to make the same mistake." Then the shotgun fired. Shadow moved before Cole did. The German Shepherd launched directly into Cole's chest. The blast shattered wood beside them. Cole lost balance instantly. Both he and the dog crashed hard across the frozen bridge. Shadow cried out sharply, a sound Cole had never heard before. Pain. Real pain. The dog collapsed against him, trembling violently. Blood spread rapidly through the snow beneath his side. "No." Cole's chest tightened in pure terror. The attackers advanced through the storm. Victor Hale's voice drifted closer. "Bring me the evidence, Barrett. This ends tonight." Cole pulled Shadow into his arms. The dog's breathing came fast now, weak. Cole looked toward the dark wilderness beyond the bridge, then toward the men, closing in behind them. And for the first time in years, fear truly broke through his combat calm, because losing the fight no longer terrified him. Losing Shadow did. The storm swallowed everything. Wind screamed across the mountains, while snow blasted sideways through the shattered remains of the old logging bridge. Victor Hale's men advanced carefully through the white darkness behind them, flashlights cutting sharp beams between the trees. Cole dropped beside Shadow immediately. The German Shepherd lay trembling in the snow, breathing fast and shallow. Blood darkened the thick fur along his ribs where the shotgun pellets had torn through. "No, no, no!" Cole's voice cracked. Shadow tried to rise anyway, still trying to protect him. The sight nearly broke something inside Cole Barrett. "Easy, buddy. Stay down." Another flashlight beam swept across the bridge. "Move!" someone shouted behind them. Cole grabbed the rifle and fired once into the trees beside the advancing men. The gunshot echoed violently through the ravine. Not accurate, just enough to slow them. Then he scooped Shadow into his arms. Pain exploded through Cole's shoulder and knee instantly under the dog's weight, but adrenaline crushed it down. He ran. The bridge groaned dangerously beneath his boots while snow and splintered wood whipped around them. Victor Hale shouted something behind him. Cole ignored it. Nothing mattered now except the dog breathing against his chest. He crossed the bridge and disappeared into the storm-covered forest beyond. The mountains swallowed them again. Cole stumbled uphill through deep snuzbun, while Shadow's blood soaked slowly into his jacket. The dog whimpered once but never fought against being carried. "Stay awake," Cole muttered desperately. "Come on, Shadow. Stay with me." His breath came ragged now. Every old injury burned. The freezing air sliced through his lungs like broken glass. Still, he kept moving. Branches clawed across his face while darkness thickened beneath the towering pines. Somewhere below them, distant voices continued searching through the storm. But farther away now, Cole pushed deeper into the mountain wilderness. Then finally, a shape emerged through the snow ahead. Tall, narrow, wooden, an abandoned fire watch tower. Cole almost collapsed from relief. The old structure leaned dangerously near the cliffside, half buried beneath years of snow and neglect. One staircase had partially collapsed, but the upper cabin still stood against the storm. Shelter, barely. Cole carried Shadow inside. The interior smelled of dust, wet wood, and frozen metal. Snow drifted through broken windows while wind rattled loose boards in the walls. But it was hidden. And for now, hidden was enough. Cole laid Shadow carefully beside an old, rusted stove and immediately examined the wounds. Blood. Too much blood. The shotgun blast had grazed the dog's side instead of hitting full center mass. Lucky, but still bad. Very bad. Ass. Cole ripped open his backpack, searching desperately through the medical supplies stolen from the bunker. Bandages, antibiotics, needles. His hands shook violently now. Not from Cole. Fear. Real fear. The kind he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Afghanistan. Shadow looked up at him weakly, still trusting him completely. Cole swallowed hard and forced himself steady. "You saved my life again," he whispered. The dog's tail thumped faintly once against the wooden floor. Cole cleaned the wounds carefully, while snow hissed against the tower windows outside. Every time Shadow flinched, guilt twisted deeper into Cole's chest. This was his fault. The dog should never have been dragged into this war. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. Shadow had already been part of it long before Cole ever arrived. Nathan Barrett made sure of that. The thought hit differently now. His father hadn't simply trained a military dog. He had spent years preparing Shadow to protect his son after he was gone. The realization hurt in ways Cole couldn't fully explain. Once the bleeding finally slowed, Shadow rested his head across Cole's lap, exhausted, but alive. Cole leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes briefly. The tower creaked softly around them while the storm buried the mountains outside. For the first time in hours, silence returned. Not peaceful silence, the exhausted kind that follows terror. Cole stared out the broken window toward the distant valley below. Faint lights moved near the lake. Victor Hale's men were still searching, still hunting. A cold fury settled slowly into his chest. Nathan Barrett died protecting evidence powerful enough to frighten men like Victor Hale for 20 years. And now those same men nearly killed the only creature Cole had left. Something inside him hardened. Then Shadow suddenly lifted his head weakly and nudged Cole's backpack. At first Cole frowned in confusion. Then the dog nudged it again. Persistent. Cole unzipped the bag slowly. Inside, beneath the cassette tapes and medical supplies, sat one object he barely remembered grabbing during the chaos underground. A yellow military ration can. Old. Scratched. Sealed tightly with black tape. Cole stared at it. Then slowly peeled the tape away. Inside sat a folded letter. Nathan's handwriting covered the envelope. For the night you finally understand. Cole's chest tightened instantly. He unfolded the letter carefully while Shadow rested beside him. The paper shook slightly in his hands. Son, if you found this, then things have gone worse than I hoped. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. Cole stopped breathing for a moment. Outside, wind moaned softly through the tower. Nathan's words continued. You spent most of your life believing I abandoned you emotionally. Maybe part of me did. I convinced myself distance was protection. That if you hated me, you'd stay far away from the things chasing our family. But I never stopped loving you, Cole. Not for 1 second. Cole lowered his eyes briefly. His throat burned. When your mother died, I became afraid of loving people openly, afraid the world would take them too. Then Hale's people discovered what I knew about the valley. They threatened you first, not me. You. That was the moment I decided I'd rather lose my son's love than bury my son beside his mother. Snow rattled softly against the windows. Cole stared at the words through blurred vision. The war overseas taught you survival, son. But this valley taught me something different. A man can survive almost anything, except losing his reason to stay alive. That's why I built this place. Not to make you rich. Not to hide money. I built it so one day you'd have somewhere the war couldn't follow you. Cole's breathing faltered. The letter continued. I knew eventually you'd come home broken. Men like us always do. And I needed there to be something waiting for you when that happened. A home, a purpose, a dog, stubborn enough not to let you disappear into yourself. Cole looked down at Shadow sleeping beside him. The old shepherd's breathing remained shallow but steady now. Nathan's final paragraph nearly shattered him completely. You think Shadow belongs to you because the military paired him with you. Truth is, he chose you long before that. I made sure of it. Because I trusted him with the one thing I failed to protect properly myself. You. The letter ended simply. If you're reading this, then you finally know the truth. I never abandoned you, son. I was trying to keep you alive long enough to come home, Dad. Cole lowered the letter slowly. The tower felt impossibly quiet now. Everything he believed about his father had been wrong. Nathan Barrett hadn't been cold, or careless, or absent. He had been terrified. Terrified enough to sacrifice his relationship with his son in exchange for distance he hoped would keep him alive. Cole covered his face with one trembling hand. Years of anger suddenly collapsed under the weight of truth. All those lonely birthdays, all those deployments, all those nights, believing nobody cared, whether he survived or not. His father had been watching, waiting, protecting him from the shadows. Shadow stirred weakly beside him and rested his head against Cole's chest. Cole wrapped both arms carefully around the dog. For a long time, he simply sat there inside the abandoned tower, while the storm howled across the Bitterroot Mountains. And somewhere deep below in the frozen valley, Victor Hale continued hunting the evidence Nathan Barrett died to protect. Morning came slowly to the mountains. The storm finally weakened near dawn, leaving Bitterroot Valley buried beneath fresh snow glowing pale blue beneath early sunlight. Smoke rose from distant chimneys and scattered homes hidden among the trees, while frozen wind drifted quietly across the lake below. Inside the abandoned Firewatch Tower, Cole Barrett sat awake beside Shadow. He hadn't slept. The dog rested against an old wool blanket near the rusted stove, breathing steadier now, though exhaustion still weighed heavily in his eyes. Cole gently checked the bandages again. Less bleeding, thank God. You're too stubborn to quit, he muttered softly. Shadow opened one eye briefly and thumped his tail once against the floorboards. Outside, the valley looked peaceful again, but Cole knew better now. Men were hunting them, armed men, professional men, and Victor Hale would not stop until every piece of Nathan Barrett's evidence disappeared forever. Cole stared down at the letter again. I built it so one day you'd have somewhere the war couldn't follow you. The words haunted him, because the war had followed him, right into the mountains. Shadow slowly pushed himself upright and limped toward the tower stairs. Cole frowned. Where are you going? The German Shepherd looked back once, then continued downward. Purposeful. Cole grabbed the rifle and followed carefully. Outside, the air felt brutally cold against his face. Snow reached almost to the knees in places, while sunlight flashed sharply across the frozen wilderness. Shadow headed north through the trees, not toward the farmhouse, toward town. Cole hesitated. The smart move would be running. Take the evidence from the bunker and disappear before Hale's people regrouped. That was survival. That was what the old version of Cole Barrett would do. But the letter changed something inside him. Nathan Barrett hadn't spent 20 years sacrificing everything just so his son could run away one more time. Cole adjusted the rifle over his shoulder and followed the dog downhill through the snow. The walk took nearly 2 hours. By the time the first buildings of Stillwater appeared through the trees, Cole's legs burned with exhaustion. The town looked like a forgotten place buried beneath winter. A small diner, a gas station, a feed store, old logging equipment rusting beside empty buildings. But unlike before, people noticed him now. Several locals stopped what they were doing as Cole and Shadow limped down the snowy main road. Word traveled fast in places like this, especially after gunfire in the valley, especially when Victor Hale's black SUVs started appearing overnight. The bell above the diner door jingled softly when Cole entered. Warm air and the smell of bacon hit him instantly. Every conversation inside stopped. Martha Grayson stood behind the counter holding a coffee pot. The elderly waitress stared at Cole's blood-stained jacket, then at Shadow's bandaged side. Her face hardened immediately. What did Hale do? The question surprised him. Not who, what, meaning she already knew exactly who was responsible. Cole lowered himself slowly into a booth. Shadow collapsed beneath the table. They found the bunker. The diner went silent. A few older men near the windows exchanged uneasy looks. Martha approached slowly. You found Nathan's evidence? Cole nodded once. Martha exhaled heavily. Lord, help us. One of the older men stood from his booth near the coffee machine. Tall, gray beard, worn ranch jacket. Name's Walter Briggs, he said quietly. I worked logging crews with your father years ago. Cole shook his hand cautiously. Walter glanced toward the windows before lowering his voice. Hale's been buying this valley piece by piece for years. Folks who resisted suddenly lost permits, lost businesses. His expression darkened. Sometimes they just disappeared. Several heads nodded quietly around the diner. Fear lived here. Cole saw it clearly now. Martha slid a hot coffee onto the table beside him. You need help, she said. Not a question. Cole stared into the steam rising from the cup. For years, he survived by trusting nobody. The military taught him isolation. PTSD perfected it. But Nathan Barrett spent decades building something different here. A community. A network. People willing to stand together. Martha looked toward the injured dog beneath the booth, then back at Cole. Nathan saved my husband once during a wildfire back in '98, she said softly. Risked his own life doing it. Her eyes sharpened. This town remembers things like that. The front diner door suddenly opened. Everyone turned instinctively. A young woman stepped inside, carrying folders beneath one arm. Mid-30s, dark winter coat, intelligent eyes behind fogged glasses. The moment she saw Cole, relief crossed her face. You're alive. Cole frowned slightly. You know me? Claire Dawson. She removed one glove quickly. County Records Office. Recognition clicked instantly. The woman from Nathan's files. Her name appeared repeatedly beside property maps and legal documents underground. Claire slid into the booth across from him without hesitation. Hale's men came to the courthouse this morning, she said quietly. They're filing emergency seizure claims on your property. Cole's jaw tightened. On what grounds? Claire gave a bitter laugh. They're claiming environmental hazard violations tied to the bunker. She leaned closer. Truth is, they're panicking. Walter folded his arms nearby. They know the evidence exists now. Claire nodded. If federal investigators get those files, Hale Development collapses. Martha glanced nervously toward the diner windows. And Hale knows it. Cole rubbed one tired hand across his face. Everything felt bigger suddenly, not just survival anymore. This valley had been bleeding quietly for decades, while powerful men buried the truth beneath money and fear. Shadow rested his head against Cole's boot beneath the table, grounding him, steadying him. Claire lowered her voice further. There's someone you need to meet. An hour later, Cole found himself inside a small law office above the town hardware store. Retired Judge Harold Bennett looked nothing like the intimidating federal judges Cole remembered from military hearings. The old man wore suspenders and thick glasses, while wood smoke drifted softly through the office. But his eyes remained sharp, very sharp. You're Nathan Barrett's boy, Bennett said quietly after studying him for several long seconds. Cole nodded once. The judge sighed heavily. Your father tried exposing Hale 15 years ago. He leaned back slowly. That's when the threats started. Claire placed several bunker files across the desk. Judge Bennett read them carefully. His expression darkened with every page. Toxic dumping, he muttered. Illegal land seizures. He looked up sharply. Good God. Cole watched him carefully. Can you help us? The old judge removed his glasses slowly. Son, he said quietly, I've been waiting 20 years for somebody to finally ask me that. By afternoon, Stillwater began changing. The valley woke up. Old veterans appeared carrying hunting rifles. Retired loggers parked trucks near the main road leading toward Nathan's property. Ranchers blocked side roads with heavy equipment. Nobody announced it officially. Nobody had to. The town had chosen sides. And for the first time since arriving in Bitterroot Valley, Cole realized he was no longer alone. Near sunset, he stood outside the diner beside Shadow, watching snow drift across town, while locals moved quietly with purpose around them. Martha stepped outside carrying 2 bowls of stew. One for you, she said. One for your 4-legged guardian angel. Cole almost smiled for the first time in years. Almost. Shadow accepted the stew happily, despite the pain medication making him sluggish. Claire joined them moments later, carrying legal folders beneath one arm. We've contacted federal environmental investigators, she said. But they'll need time. How much time? A day. Maybe 2. Cole looked toward the distant mountains. Victor Hale would never give them 2 peaceful days. As if summoned by the thought, engines echoed faintly from somewhere down the valley road. Everyone on the street turned. 3 black SUVs appeared through falling snow. Stopping near the gas station, Victor Hale stepped out slowly, wearing a long, dark coat. The entire town went still. Hale looked directly at Cole across the street, then slowly smiled. Not friendly, predatory. He removed his gloves calmly, while several armed contractors emerged behind him. Claire whispered softly beside Cole. He's making a statement. Walter Briggs appeared nearby, gripping a hunting rifle. So are we. One by one, townspeople stepped onto porches and sidewalks around Main Street. Veterans, ranchers, old loggers, not aggressive, just present, watching. Victor Hale studied them carefully. Then his eyes settled on Shadow resting beside Cole. The smile faded slightly. For the first time since this began, Victor Hale realized the valley itself was beginning to fight back. And Cole Barrett finally understood something his father learned years earlier. A man alone can disappear quietly, but a community standing together becomes much harder to bury. Night settled heavily over Bitterroot Valley. Snow drifted softly through the streets of Stillwater while porch lights glowed warm against the darkness. Pickup trucks lined the roads leading toward Nathan Barrett's property, their engines occasionally rumbling in the cold. Nobody trusted Victor Hale anymore. Not after the threats. Not after armed men appeared in the valley carrying military weapons. Inside Martha Grayson's diner, tension sat thick as smoke in the air. Cole stood near the front window, watching the black SUVs parked near the gas station across town. Victor Hale hadn't left. He was waiting, planning. Claire Dawson spread maps across one of the diner tables while Judge Bennett studied them carefully beneath yellow overhead lights. If Hale realizes federal investigators are actually coming, Claire said quietly, he'll try destroying the bunker tonight. Walter Briggs nodded grimly beside her. He'll burn the whole valley down first. Cole looked toward Shadow lying beneath the booth. The German Shepherd slept lightly now, breathing steadier but weaker than before. Pain medication dulled the dog's reactions, though his ears still twitched whenever engines sounded outside. Cole crouched beside him. You should stay here. Shadow opened his eyes immediately, stubborn as ever. Cole almost smiled. You're not listening anyway, are you? The shepherd slowly pushed himself upright despite the pain. Judge Bennett removed his glasses tiredly. Hale's cornered, the old judge said quietly. That's when dangerous men become desperate. A sudden engine roar outside interrupted him. Then another. Walter moved to the window instantly. Trouble. Cole stood fast. Headlights approached town from the south road. Not one vehicle. Several. Black SUVs. Fast. The first truck skidded sideways across Main Street, spraying snow in every direction. Doors flew open immediately. Armed contractors poured out. Victor Hale stepped calmly from the final SUV behind them. The town froze. Then chaos erupted. Everybody inside! Walter shouted. Men grabbed rifles from beneath counters and truck seats. Ranchers moved families off the streets while veterans spread quickly into defensive positions along storefront windows. Cole's military instincts snapped alive instantly. Hale's moving early, Claire whispered. No. Cole realized something colder. Hale wasn't here for intimidation anymore. He was here to erase evidence. Outside, Victor Hale's voice carried across the snowy street. Bring me the bunker files, he shouted calmly. And nobody else gets hurt tonight. Nobody answered. The valley had already chosen sides. Hale sighed almost sadly, then nodded once toward his men. The first Molotov bottle crashed through the hardware store window. Glass exploded outward. Flames erupted instantly inside the building. People screamed. Gunfire cracked through the night. The battle for Bitterroot Valley had begun. Cole grabbed the rifle and moved automatically. Shadow, stay. The dog ignored him immediately and limped after him into the storm. Bullets shattered diner windows as townspeople scrambled for cover. Veterans returned fire carefully from behind trucks, while Hale's contractors advanced with frightening discipline down the street. Professional formation, military spacing. Cole recognized the tactics instantly. These aren't security guards, he muttered. Walter Briggs fired once from behind a snowplow. Then what are they? Cole's expression hardened. Mercenaries. Another explosion rocked the far end of town as flames spread through an abandoned feed store. Victor Hale intended to create confusion, fear. Enough destruction to reach Nathan's property before authorities arrived. Cole spotted 3 contractors moving toward Claire behind a parked truck. He reacted instantly. 2 controlled rifle shots slammed into the snow near them, forcing the men into cover. Move, he shouted. Claire sprinted toward the diner while gunfire ripped through street signs around her. Shadow barked furiously beside Cole despite struggling to stay upright. The old shepherd still tracked every threat before Cole saw them. Always. Suddenly, Shadow growled sharply toward the frozen lake road. Cole turned. Another SUV bypassed town entirely, heading straight toward Nathan's property, toward the bunker. Victor Hale noticed too. The man smiled faintly across the snowy street. Diversion accomplished. Cole's chest tightened instantly. They're going for the evidence. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward Walter's truck. Shadow followed immediately. Walter tossed him the keys. Take it! Cole climbed behind the wheel while bullets cracked through the darkness behind them. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat with a painful grunt. The old truck fishtailed violently onto the frozen lake road. Behind them, Stillwater continued fighting. The drive through the valley became a blur of snow, darkness, and adrenaline. The truck bounced hard across frozen ruts, while pine trees flashed past in ghostly shadows. Ahead, faint headlights moved near the farmhouse. Too late. Hale's men had already arrived. Cole killed the truck lights immediately and stopped near the tree line overlooking the property. Flames flickered ahead. The farmhouse porch burned. No, Cole stared in disbelief. Nathan's home, the place built with decades of sacrifice and hope, burning beneath the snow. 3 armed men moved around the barn carrying fuel cans, while another group searched near the bunker hatch. Victor Hale stood near the frozen lake, speaking calmly into a satellite phone. Shadow growled low. Cole checked his ammunition automatically. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but enough. He looked down at the dog. "You stay behind me this time." Shadow's ears twitched. Then the dog slowly stood despite shaking legs and blood-stained bandages. Still ready. Still loyal. Cole swallowed hard. The farmhouse roof collapsed suddenly in a shower of sparks. The sound echoed across the frozen lake. Something inside Cole finally broke loose. Not fear, not grief, rage. Pure, controlled, rage. He moved. Fast, silent. Years of SEAL operations returned fully now. Cole circled through the trees using darkness and snow as cover, while Shadow tracked silently beside him. The first contractor never saw him coming. Cole slammed into the man hard from behind and drove him face first into the snow. Weapon gone, unconscious. Shadow alerted instantly toward the second guard near the barn. Cole fired once. The bullet shattered the fuel can beside the man, forcing him backward into cover. Chaos erupted around the property. Shouting, gunfire, flames. Victor Hale spun toward the attack instantly. "There!" he shouted. Mercenaries spread fast across the snow. Cole retreated toward the frozen lake deliberately, drawing them away from the bunker. Shadow moved beside him like instinct itself, despite limping badly now. Then, gunfire exploded from the shoreline. A contractor hidden near the docks opened fire directly at Cole. Too close. Cole dropped behind an overturned fishing boat just as bullets tore through the wood above him. Shadow barked sharply. "Warning." Another shooter moved from the left. Cole rolled sideways and returned fire once. The man disappeared behind the trees. Then came Victor Hale's voice echoing across the ice. "It's over, Barrett." Cole risked one glance toward the lake. Hale stood near the shoreline holding a pistol calmly. Behind him, one contractor carried a flamethrower unit toward the barn. They intended to destroy everything. Cole's breathing slowed dangerously. Think, move, survive. Shadow suddenly stiffened beside him, then launched forward. Shadow. The German shepherd sprinted directly across open ice toward a contractor, raising his rifle at Cole. The mercenary fired once. Then Shadow hit him full force. Man and dog crashed violently across the frozen lake. Cole surged from cover, instantly firing toward the remaining attackers. Gunfire erupted everywhere now. The lake became noise and smoke and flashing muzzle fire against falling snow. Cole reached Shadow, just as the dog collapsed beside the struggling contractor. Blood spread rapidly beneath the shepherd's body. Too much. Way too much. No, no, no. Cole dropped beside him. Shadow tried lifting his head. Failed. The contractor beneath him reached weakly for a handgun. Cole ripped it away and shoved the man backward across the ice. Then everything narrowed to the dog. Shadow's breathing came shallow now. Weak. Cole pressed both shaking hands against the wound desperately. Stay with me. Snow drifted softly across the frozen lake around them. The world suddenly felt strangely quiet. Victor Hale approached slowly, through the chaos, carrying the pistol loosely at his side. It didn't have to end this way, Hale said calmly. Cole looked up slowly. Something terrifying burned behind his eyes now. Years of grief, war, loss, everything. The old soldier inside him finally gone completely raw. You killed my father, Cole said quietly. Hale shrugged once. Your father made himself a problem. The words settled like gasoline over fire. Then, suddenly, a deep crackling voice exploded across the valley. From the bunker radio system, Nathan Barrett's recordings, broadcasting. Every speaker in the valley roared alive. Environmental reports, names, illegal dumping records, federal crimes. Claire Dawson had activated the evidence transmission remotely from town. Victor Hale's face changed instantly. Panic. Real panic. Then distant sirens echoed through the mountains, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Federal agents. State police. The valley had held long enough. Hale turned sharply toward the road. Too late. Red and blue emergency lights appeared through the falling snow surrounding the property from every direction. Mercenaries began dropping weapons immediately. Victor Hale stared around the valley, realizing everything had collapsed. Cole barely noticed. He remained kneeling beside Shadow on the frozen lake, while snow collected slowly across both of them. The dog's eyes fluttered weakly. Cole pressed his forehead gently against Shadow's neck. Don't leave me, he whispered brokenly. For the first time in years, Cole Barrett cried openly, Not for war, not for trauma, not for himself, for the dog who had carried him home when nothing else could. Federal agents swarmed the property around them while flames consumed the remains of the farmhouse behind the lake. But Cole stayed there beside Shadow in the falling snow long after the fighting ended, holding on to the only family he had left. The sirens faded eventually. So did the shouting. Federal agents moved across the property securing evidence while firefighters battled the remains of the farmhouse near the lake. Red and blue emergency lights flashed across the snow-covered valley, like distant lightning beneath the winter sky. But Cole barely noticed any of it. He remained kneeling on the frozen lake beside Shadow. The dog's breathing had become frighteningly shallow now, each breath slower than the last. Cole pressed trembling hands against the shepherd's wounds while snow settled across both of them in soft white layers. "Stay with me," he whispered again. Shadow's eyes flickered weakly toward him, still focused on him. Always him. Then suddenly hands grabbed Cole's shoulders from behind. "We need to move him now." Claire Dawson knelt beside him, her face pale from cold and fear. Behind her stood two paramedics carrying emergency veterinary equipment from one of the county rescue trucks. Cole blinked like he'd forgotten other people existed. One paramedic gently examined Shadow's wounds. "We still have a pulse." Still. The word hit like hope, breaking through darkness. The paramedics carefully loaded Shadow onto a stretcher, while Cole walked beside them in silence across the frozen lake. Victor Hale was being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle nearby, wrists cuffed behind his back. The powerful businessman no longer looked untouchable. He looked old, small, defeated. Hale glanced toward Cole once as agents closed the SUV door. Cole gave him nothing back. No anger, no victory, just emptiness, because none of it mattered if Shadow died. The veterinary clinic sat 30 miles away, in Hamilton. Cole rode in the back beside Shadow the entire drive through the mountains while snow continued falling outside the ambulance windows. The shepherd remained unconscious most of the trip. Cole never let go of his paw. The smell of antiseptic hit hard when they arrived. Bright lights, rushed footsteps, doctors, machines. The same helplessness Cole remembered from military hospitals, flooded back immediately. Only this time it wasn't soldiers disappearing behind emergency doors. It was Shadow, a young veterinarian named Doctor. Emily Carter met them in the hallway. "He's lost a lot of blood," she said carefully. "But he's strong. Strong." Cole almost laughed at that. Strong didn't begin to describe the dog. They wheeled Shadow into surgery. Then the doors closed, and Cole Barrett found himself alone. Again. Hours passed slowly. The waiting room remained quiet except for the hum of vending machines and distant medical monitors somewhere down the hall. Claire stayed beside him most of the night, sometimes speaking, mostly not. Around dawn, Walter Briggs arrived carrying coffee in a cardboard tray. Soon after came Martha Grayson, wrapped in a heavy winter coat. Then Judge Bennett. Then half the valley. Ranchers, veterans, loggers, people Nathan Barrett once helped quietly over decades. They filled the waiting room without being asked. Cole sat among them, stunned by the sight. For most of his life, he'd believed suffering was something a man survived alone. The military reinforced that lie. PTSD buried it deeper. But now strangers sat beside him through the darkest night of his life, simply because they refused to let him face it by himself. Martha squeezed his shoulder gently. "Your father would have been proud of you." Cole lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, the words didn't hurt. Near sunrise, Dr. Carter finally emerged from surgery. Everyone stood immediately. The veterinarian looked exhausted. Then she smiled softly. "He made it." The entire room released its breath together. Cole sat down hard in the nearest chair. His hands shook violently now that the adrenaline finally disappeared. Alive. Shadow was alive. Tears burned his eyes again before he could stop them. Walter Briggs laughed quietly and wiped his own face at the same time. "Tough old bastard," he muttered. 3 days later, the snowstorm finally cleared from Bitterroot Valley. Federal investigators swarmed Nathan Barrett's property around the clock. News helicopters circled overhead, while evidence from the bunker spread across national broadcasts. Victor Hale's empire collapsed fast. Environmental crimes, illegal land seizures, bribery, disappearances tied to contractors. Everything Nathan spent 20 years protecting finally reached the world. But Cole barely watched the news. He stayed beside Shadow. The dog slowly recovered beneath warm blankets near the veterinary clinic windows. while winter sunlight returned to the mountains outside. Every morning, Cole sat beside him with coffee in one hand and Nathan's old letters in the other. And little by little, the anger inside him began disappearing. Spring arrived slowly in Bitterroot Valley. Snow melted from the pine forests first, revealing dark earth and hidden streams beneath the ice. The frozen lake thawed beneath bright Montana skies while green returned cautiously to the mountains. Nathan Barrett's farmhouse was gone, but something new rose in its place. The valley rebuilt together. Old veterans helped frame the new lodge beside the lake using timber cut from local mills. Ranchers donated supplies. Claire organized permits and records. Martha fed entire work crews from sunrise to sunset. Even Judge Bennett showed up carrying lumber despite everybody protesting his age. "What?" the old man grumbled. "I still know how to swing a hammer." Cole worked beside them every day, healing without realizing it. The nightmares still came sometimes, the panic attacks too. But now, when they happened, he wasn't tread alone in a rusted truck anymore. There were people nearby, people who understood silence, people who stayed. By late summer, the new building stood complete beside the lake. Simple, strong, warm, a retreat for struggling veterans and retired service dogs. Nathan's dream finally made real. A place where broken men could breathe again, a place where war didn't have to follow them home forever. The sign near the entrance read, "Barrett Ridge Retreat. Welcome home." On the first evening, after construction ended, Cole sat alone on the rebuilt porch, overlooking the lake, while sunset painted the mountains gold and crimson. Shadow rested beside him, older now, slower. A long scar crossed the dog's side beneath his dark fur, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. Cole reached down and scratched behind his ears gently. "You scared the hell out of me, you know that?" Shadow's tail thumped once against the wooden porch, the same way it always had. Cole smiled faintly. A real smile this time. Then he noticed something sitting beside the porch chair. One final cassette tape, untouched. Nathan's handwriting covered the label. "For the day you finally stay." Cole stared at it quietly for a long moment, then reached for the old recorder resting nearby. The tape clicked softly into place. Static hissed. And finally, Nathan Barrett's voice returned one last time. "Hi, son." Cole closed his eyes briefly. The mountains stood silent around him while evening wind moved softly across the lake. "I hoped you'd make it this far," Nathan said gently. "Truth is, I wasn't always sure you would. Men like us." He paused quietly. "We learn how to survive danger, but surviving peace is harder." Cole looked down at Shadow resting beside him. The dog lifted his head slightly at the sound of Nathan's voice. Nathan continued softly through the recorder. "A man survives war by finding something worth staying for." The words settled deep into the evening air. "I spent years believing protecting people meant keeping them at a distance," Nathan admitted. "But I was wrong about that." A long pause followed. "Home isn't walls or land, Cole. It's the people who wait for you to come back." Cole swallowed hard. The tape crackled gently. "You came home carrying ghosts," Nathan said. "But ghosts lose power when living people stand beside you." Sunlight faded slowly across the valley. The lake reflected fire-colored skies beneath the Bitterroot Mountains while pine trees swayed gently in warm summer wind. Nathan's final words came softer now. "If you're listening to this, then you finally found what I wanted for you all along." Another pause. "Peace." The tape hissed quietly. Then Nathan whispered one final sentence. "Welcome home, son." The recording clicked off. Silence settled across the porch. Not empty silence, peaceful silence. Cole sat there beside Shadow, watching darkness slowly cover the mountains. Months earlier, he had arrived in Bitterroot Valley homeless, hunted, and broken by memories he could never outrun. Now the same valley held something entirely different. A home, a purpose, a future. Below the porch, laughter drifted from veterans gathered around a fire pit near the lake, while retired service dogs rested beside them beneath hanging lantern lights. Life, real life. Shadow slowly rested his head against Cole's boot. Cole looked down at him and smiled softly. Then together, man and dog watched the last sunlight disappear behind the mountains that had once hidden secrets, violence, and grief, and had somehow become the place that finally saved them both. If you believe a man should never lose the right to fight for his home, type home down in the comments. And if you've ever had a dog stay loyal through the hardest years of your life, drop a 1 for Shadow. Subscribe if you'd like to follow more stories about justice, old scars, second chances, and the people who refuse to back down in the land they love.